Just a quick bit of housekeeping, Dole. Thank you for the prayer. I know we've got Ash Wednesday service next week, obviously. And I'm looking at, I don't know if it'd be Dole, I don't know if Logan's still in here. So where will that service be, Dole? In the sanctuary, okay. And I'll try to do a better job reading up on all the details, but anyway. But we are gonna have a meal next week, is that right? Okay. A lot of y'all have asked, what are we gonna do with Valentine's Day and Ash Wednesday? So we'll see. I'll remind y'all that Saint Valentine was a martyr, so Ash Wednesday is still a pretty appropriate day for Valentine as well. All right, so tonight we're wrapping up. We've done 5 weeks, which is kind of a good length of time to talk about Baptist identity and what it means to be a Baptist. I want to kind of end, so to speak, as I began, and that is, while I do believe it's very important to know what is it that distinguishes First Baptist Roswell from, say, First United Methodist just up Mimosa. And not because we want to declare tribal warfare with our brothers and sisters up the road, but we also know that all things are not relative. There are things that distinguish us and make us unique. And the same can be said for our Presbyterian friends, our Catholic friends, Episcopal friends, and so forth. So while I believe it is important to understand and continue to grow and deepen what it means in our case to be Baptist, what is it that distinguishes us, I remind you all that what is most important beyond these doors is not the middle name of the church. Folks aren't going to just pour into here because it says First Baptist Church. It's not that it's insignificant, but that's usually not what is the why. Especially in a culture in which increasingly people aren't churched and are not connected. In my tenure as a pastor, you know, the trends I was watching was, well, when they go away to college, they kind of leave church for a while, and then the pattern would be, but then they circle around because they get married and they start having children and they want to come back to church. Well, that train left the building. And now you're having literally generations, particularly Generation Z, which is showing a marked difference between now we have generations that are becoming adults who were never raised in church. And so for us, and I'm not saying we are, but if our lead is, let me just tell you about Baptist distinctives, that's not going to work. And you and I know what is going to work. Personally connecting with others. And people want to understand, but what does this mean to you? So now I'm going to look to my friend in the back who's been trying to guess the questions every week for the sermon series. And so the question coming up this Sunday is, what do you want me to do for you? All right, so I'll get a spoiler alert. But a question that I was debating about using as an equally good one, and I think it's Matthew 16, where the disciples are with Jesus and he says, who do the people say that I am? And do you remember how they responded? They said, well, some say you're Elijah, and some say you're Moses, and some say the prophets. I'm giving the Greg DeLoach updated version, by the way. They're basically giving what everybody else says. And then Jesus has the great question, right? You remember what it is? But who do you say that I am? Right? And really, that is the corporate response and individual response of any healthy congregation. Being able to leave here and give faithful testimony of how Christ has made a transformative difference in your life. Because you don't have to have all of the doctrinal or theological answers to the many questions of this world. Again, not saying they're not important. I'm in a theology school, for goodness sake. They're very important, but that's not what's most important. They're going to want to know, yeah, but what does that mean to you and to me? And how are we connecting with it? And in that case, I'd say you need to be yourself authentically and figure out how that connects with your own formation here in this church. Okay, so that's how I sort of began 5 weeks ago. That's kind of the lingering message I want us to walk out on in just a few minutes when we wrap all of this up. Now that said, I've used as our framing device to talk about Baptist distinctives, the work of Baptist historian Walter Sheridan, who goes by the name Buddy, but you won't see that on his books. But Buddy Sheridan, who taught for most of his career at Mercer undergraduate, but taught also at Southern Seminary a long, long time ago. He's now retired. His wife's a therapist. They're retired in Tennessee. And by the way, it's helpful for a Baptist minister to have a therapist as a spouse. I mean, it just kind of works. Dole, I don't know what your family does to keep sanity, but anyway, he wrote, has written extensively in terms of Baptist history, Baptist identity, but I think his work in the early 90s has held traction through the years. And I think it applies for Baptists regardless of what flavor Baptist you are. Meaning historically Baptist with all of the different ways that Baptists live out their identity. So we have talked about church freedom. This is in no particular order. Church freedom. We all know that in this church intuitively. We make the determination, we are autonomous, and we make the decisions on how we will lead and govern and bear witness in the world. There is soul freedom, which that probably should be the lead identity marker. That is, every individual has the responsibility, because if freedom implies responsibility, has the responsibility of one's faith formation. Now, that leads into some of the things that we think that is distinguishable about Baptists, and that is how we do baptism, right? We tend to think of baptism as our primary distinctive. Well, there's many denominations that share that. But one of the things that Baptists historically embraced was believer's baptism. So a person had to be old enough to be responsible enough. A 4-year-old is not responsible. A 4-year-old is a 4-year-old. But as we get older, we take on responsibilities. And by the way, if you're a parent and you're wondering about your own child, it's a very normal conversation to have with your child, and to invite ministers into that conversation. So many times I'll sit with families, but I'll if you are a family member of a small child, and I can't speak for the staff at First Roswell, but this is what I would do. So let's just say mom comes and brings the child, talk about they're thinking about getting baptized, and of course I'll first say, well, that's not why. So let's start there. Then the next thing I'll do is I'll excuse the parents to leave the room. Because I don't need the parent speaking for the child. I need to talk to that child about what's going on. And so you're discerning together. So soul freedom implies you, and I are personally responsible for our salvation. Not that you save yourself, but that you can receive or reject. That's soul freedom. So church freedom, soul freedom, Bible freedom, we've talked about that. And that is that we have the access of Scripture to us. It's written not only in our vernacular, which for most of us that would be English, but now we have dozens of English translations, that have all kinds of English. And people usually give me the question, what's the best English translation? Well, there really isn't a best English translation. There are some that are better. I read from the New Revised Standard Version, which now has an updated edition, for two reasons. It does tend to be a very faithful translation, but it uses English that sounds readable. So it's a Bible that tends to be heard well and has a nice accuracy to the original languages. When I was in seminary, and I want to look to our seminarians, we all knew that the New American Standard Version was what you studied alongside Greek and Hebrew, because it was called the Wooden Translation. It didn't read well, but if you could memorize the book of Philippians in the New American Standard Version, you make it work out your Greek a little bit, so those are some little tricks that we would kind of play with. But there are many good translations out there in the English language. And yes, some are better, but now they're just translating them so fast, it's very hard to keep up. I don't know if I've noticed in this church, but I know that for many, the Message is a real popular, and that's considered less a translation, although it was by Eugene Peterson, a translation, but it's more of a paraphrase. So it's sort of like me reading John chapter 3 and then looking to you and telling you, this is what this said, and putting it in a paraphrase form. Eugene Peterson, though, has this translation. He died a few years back, but it's a good book to, if you like, let's say you're working through a passage of scripture and you're like going, or maybe it's just me, but you're reading something, you're like going, what are they talking about? You know, and you're really, his is a good parallel to read. Well, let's put it in different wording and paraphrases it back to you. Here's what I vote on. If it connects you better with the holy, then that may be working for you. So I'm going to say something that may offend some of you. Probably one of the worst translations, and it's really another paraphrase, one of the worst ones out there. You ready for it? We called it in seminary the Greeny Weenie, the Living Bible. Y'all remember that? Living Bible. How many of y'all got a copy of the Living Bible? All right. That was my first Bible. My grandmother gave me that for my 9th birthday, my grandmother and granddaddy. But let me, and yes, all of what I just said is true. Not a good translation. There's plenty of places where it's actually kind of wrong in how it took sections of the Bible. I grew in my faith by the Living Bible. I grew in my spirituality. My faith was formed. No exaggeration. I fell in love with Jesus because of the letters in red in the Living Bible. And for me, that still is a formative memory for me. Now, we have things that shape us, but we also don't stay as children. We grow and we learn and we discover and we pick on things. So, okay, Bible freedom. Finally, tonight we're going to talk about religious freedom. And really, I just need a couple of minutes and love to hear your thoughts about that. I've alluded to this on several occasions, but with religious freedom is a Baptist staple historically in America. Because when America was a collection of colonies, to be a Baptist was to be outside the law. The state church was the Church of England. And only the Church of England could faithfully proclaim the gospel. Baptists were sectarians in England and made their way over as other religions, such as Quakers. Puritans came to purify, if you will, the Church of England. So they were immigrating here to the colonies. But Baptists were one of a handful that made that distinctive difference. I want to read to you from the 1963 Baptist Faith and Message. I think it's Article 17. It's been a long time since I've done Roman numerals. Article 17. Do they even teach that anymore in school? I'm serious. Do they? Y'all remember learning Roman numerals? Yeah. The Super Bowl, yeah. And that's getting hard. The longer the Super Bowl goes, it's difficult. Okay. I think this is Article 17, 1963 Baptist Faith and Message. It's on religious liberty. Now remember, Baptists are free to accept or reject. The Baptist Faith and Message was a way to try to help Baptists collectively think about what makes us unique. God alone is Lord of the conscience, and he has left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men which are contrary to his word or not contained in it. Church and state should be separate. The state owes to every church protection and full freedom in the pursuit of its spiritual ends. In providing for such freedom, no ecclesiastical group or denomination should be favored by the state more than others. Civil government being ordained of God, it is the duty of Christians to render loyal obedience thereto in all things not contrary to the revealed will of God. The church should not resort to the civil power to carry on its work. The gospel of Christ contemplates spiritual means alone for the pursuit of its ends. The state has no right to impose penalties for religious opinions of any kind. The state has no right to impose taxes for the support of any form of religion. A free church in a free state is the Christian ideal, and this implies the right of free and unhindered access to God on the part of all men, and the right to form and propagate opinions in the sphere of religion without interference by the civil power. It's a lot of words there. What did you hear?
Separation. Church and state.
Well, yeah, that was actually said kind of outright. By the way, that wasn't new to the Baptist Faith and Message. That dates back to Thomas Jefferson and the bill of the amendments for the state of Virginia. He was influenced by two Baptists, Isaac Backus and John Leland, who as Baptists were impressing upon Thomas Jefferson, we need protection here. You know, we're being persecuted by the dominant church, and we should have the freedom to believe. We should have the freedom to assemble. And it led then further to the inspiration of Thomas Jefferson for what we have as the First Amendment. So yes, it's keeping the power separate. And what else did you hear? Separation of church and state. What else? And I know there's a lot of words.
We have to protect our rights so that we can.
That's right.
Our freedom.
The government has a responsibility to protect our freedom. It's a two-way street. I'll get to that in a moment. So we do take for granted, and we do. I do. I know you do. I don't ever give any thought that I'm going to show up one Sunday and it's going to be a problem. Never once in my life, even remotely, thought that's going to be a problem. No, of course. We have that right. If you've been on any number of mission trips, you do need to know that's a problem in places. Today, it's a problem. We did, I won't name the location. We did a Mercer on Mission, which at Mercer it's called Mercer on Mission, where they're bringing students to do work that aligns with their degree program. So if they're engineers, they may work on developing clean water systems in developing countries so that they can have access. It started with a pilot program in their orthopedic program where they develop and do develop very inexpensive prosthetics, and they'd go to Vietnam, and these students would go over and fit Vietnamese who'd lost limbs to landmines that are still a problem in Vietnam, and fit them with these prosthetics. So Mercer on Mission. So they've gone all over the world. I forget how many countries. They do different things. A couple of years ago, we went to a country where to be openly Christian was tolerated, but you could not in any way promote it. So you could be Christian. So we couldn't even call it Mercer on Mission. The government was willing to accept us to do work there, but it had to be called something else because mission implies church work, right? I give that as an example to say that's true in many places in the world, but we don't think about that in the United States. The other part of this, it also reminds us that we have a responsibility to support the government within matters of conscience. So it does give you the width to say sometimes we have to decide, is the government acting against our consciousness? And then we have a responsibility before Christ. But otherwise, we work to be supportive. Now, Baptists have had anything else that struck out to y'all? There's plenty in here, but that was just a paragraph I wanted to read to you. 1963, so it's nothing new, nothing novel, and it's also echoed in the 1925 statement. So again, this has been going on in a formal way for over a century, in a historic way, at least since the 1600s, as far as Baptists are concerned. That's right. All right. So yeah, that may feel like we're stating the obvious, but the government doesn't support our work, meaning they don't fund us. I remember once it was a career day at a high school, and a teacher asked me if I would come and talk about my work, and my kids were not in this class. It was just that. I had a church member as a teacher, and I had a student. These were all teenagers, but she said, "How do you get paid?" And she goes, and I said, "Not well." And but no, I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, like, does the government give y'all money or whatever?" I said, No. Until you try to have a conversation to a student who doesn't have an understanding about that. But now, if you're in England, they have a state church. Now, I don't know how that works in terms of how clergy are not paid directly from the coffers of taxation in England. It doesn't quite work that way, but it is a state church. Who's the head of the church in England? Well, Queen's dead now. I know. She's alive in our hearts, isn't she? Yeah. King Charles. Yeah. So the monarch, and they literally are the head of the church. So that's the way it's structured there. America from its founding has distinguished itself as protecting that. Now that means a couple of things, or it actually means three things. We have the freedom to believe, and we have the freedom not to believe. And we should allow the latitude for others to also enjoy such freedoms. So the freedom to exercise it means that we also have the responsibility to grow and develop and nurture our faith, but also advocate for others to grow and nurture their faith. This church modeled this years ago when one of the synagogues met here for about 2 years, if I remember my history correctly. I've only been here a few months, y'all, so don't test me on this. Elwin, where are you? All right, do you remember how long
I really don't.
All right.
I don't know if anybody else.
Anybody on the history committee? Anyway, I think about 2 years. It really doesn't matter. When I read that, I thought, that's pretty awesome. Because now we do have religious differences with our Jewish friends. We do, you know. We believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. That is something that our Jewish friends would not accept. So we have pretty big differences, we could say, even though we are come from a common ancestry. But this church said, well, we're going to have space for you that's going to be safe space where you can gather in freedom to practice your faith as you understand. I think it's a marvelous example about what it means to live in this great country of ours, to cherish that freedom. There's so many, anything else that you heard in that paragraph that you want to make sure we highlight? I want to make sure I'm not boring you with too much information. There's a few ways that we can look at what does it mean to exercise Baptist freedom, to exercise religious freedom. A couple of models you can look at, several models actually. One is a domination model. So domination means that we exercise it, and our end game is to actually dominate the culture of the society. So one day, I'm being hypothetical, one day we win, and then we become the religious authority in our country, or however we want to define that. Now, I hope that we can quickly understand how problematic that is. Jesus didn't die on a cross that we rule by the hand of Caesar. Remember the words of Christ, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God, which was Jesus' own way of messing with some head space there. Because what belongs to God is everything, right? But we also have to do what we have to do within that. So there's a domination model that some would probably advocate for, hopefully not here. There's the accommodation model, religious freedom as accommodating. And basically, it is a culture accommodating religion, religion accommodating culture. You may have heard it called something like civic religion. And in some ways, we do that whether we want to or not. So during the era of blue laws, remember those? All right, so that was when you could say local communities favored the church. And so what would happen on blue laws? Pardon?
Stores were closed.
Stores were closed, right, on Sunday. Movie theaters closed, right? Restaurants closed because need to be in church. And then we've all seen this. I mean, I have, and seen the laws ease up, and now they are all but non-existent. There are some that are still on the books that are kind of curiosities, and sometimes you'll stumble into them. I'm not going to get into whether blue laws were a good idea or not. I think it was probably not very meaningful, but nevertheless, it is an example of how, as a culture, it was working to in some ways to be supportive, at least from a certain kind of religion, certain particular kind of religion. But now the script is flipped so completely. So I don't know how many parents of young children we have here, but soccer games go on 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night. Travel League Baseball. And I'm kind of giving some hypotheticals, but we could talk about anything. I mean, what is not closed on Sundays, right? Now, I'm not advocating we go and rally our local legislators about reenacting blue laws here, but we are kind of, trying to figure out how do we fit in? What is it that we are accommodating? So on some level, we all are accommodating here. Then there's a model called compartmentalization. And I think it was Martin Luther that called it the dual kingdom theory. And this is where you take the reading of Jesus, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God. And it's literally separating out, okay, we do this from a civic perspective, and it may or may not contradict our faith, but because it is for civic purposes, we can compartmentalize and do this. And then in this compartment is our faith, hence the language, the dual kingdom theory there. An example of this would be Rockefeller. I think I've got, let me try. Yeah, Rockefeller. So, anybody ever read his history, his bio? All right. So, I mean, the guy was, I think, we'd call him a ruthless, cutthroat businessman. He knew how to make money, and lots of it in his day. He was also dedicated, or was rather raised in a very strict Baptist family. And so he's also one of the most generous persons. And so for him, it was, hey, business is business. This is just business, right? And then my faith is here. Now I think you can kind of see how, well, that too is a bit problematic to hold these compartments. And I don't buy that. Some interpret sayings of Jesus with that compartmentalized view. Because it's tempting. You read the Sermon on the Mount lately? I mean, we talk about posting the 10 Commandments. Oh, that's easy peasy. You better hope we don't post the Sermon on the Mount. There's some stuff there that's pretty doggone challenging. All right. And so, or pick your favorite gospel that you want to kind of pull into that. So that's compartmentalizing. Let me just say, I'm not an advocate of that either. And I think part of the Christian witness that has suffered so is that we have too long compartmentalized our faith, and the world is watching. And so we can't say this profession, but live that kind of practice, and not expect others to say, I think that's a contradiction, right? And again, I feel like we know that, but it's worth saying that because sometimes we implicitly might be acting out a little bit differently. Finally, there's the very simple persuasive model. Let me read to you a passage from Romans. Practice humility. This is chapter 13. Let every person be subject to this is chapter 13, I'm sorry. Yeah, Romans 13, I'm sorry. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Do good, then do what is good, and you will receive its approval. Live persuasively, pay to all what is due to them, taxes to whom that taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due. Now, Paul lived in an era, and he is the theologian of the New Testament, in which, for lack of a better way to put it, the early Christians were just trying to survive. They were living in a pagan world where the dominant voices were not always friendly to the Christian beliefs. But Paul argued often, in particular in the book of Romans, about, well, our role then is to live here, but live in persuasive ways. Now, while we can bemoan the changing world that we live in, and we do, folks, it's not like it used to be. But I think my granddaddy said that. And I think his granddaddy said that. So on the one hand, that's just a truism, right? But what is very different than when my grandfather was alive is that the Christian faith is not the dominant faith in our country. Statistics are showing over and over again. This coming summer, the Southern Baptist Convention is going to look at yet another reorganization plan because since what was called the conservative resurgence of 1979, you can chart this on the map, there's been a plummet. The baptisms and memberships have not kept pace with population growth. And y'all know graphs, how that works. When one's going up and one's going down, that's not good. So we're going down. And so Baptists are kind of revisiting, well, maybe we need to, rearrange the deck chairs, or maybe we need to do something different with these agencies. And that's out of my pay grade. So I'm not really equipped to give comment about that. What I would like to say to the local congregation of First Baptist Roswell is that our work is not simply worry about the demographics and what are we going to do, what are we going to do, what are we going to do, but rather to talk about what it means to live faithfully and persuasively. Now, persuasively sounds like a soft word here, but I do stand behind the fact that we live in meaningful ways in which we're connecting with others, and whatever that might look like. And what Roswell is contending with is maybe different than what Marietta is contending with. And that may be very different than what Cartersville is contending with. And that's going to be certainly different than what Canton is dealing with, and so on and so on and so forth. So a church is called to come back together and say, okay, well, who are we? And then how do we connect with those around us? And thanks be to God for religious freedom to say, nobody's going to get in your way to do that. You have the soul freedom of the responsibility. You have the Bible freedom of the interpretation of Scripture. You have the church freedom to exercise that out as you see fit. And you have the religious freedom to know that you are protected, meaning we are protected, to live that out. I handed to Logan earlier today. I was just kind of curious, and I've already forgotten the name of the database, but we have access to a database that's through the Association of Theological Schools, and it's basically, it pulls together several streams of data, U.S. Census being one, but also other entities, and it wants to give a religious profile of your communities. And you've seen models like this, but basically what I did is I took to a pinpointed First Baptist Roswell, and I did a 10-mile radius. And I don't know if that's too big or not, but I remember hearing Sunday the 30 or so schools that are represented. So I feel like anybody live further than 10 miles out? Oh, so I didn't go far enough. I live, 3 miles out, but so I felt like 10 miles might probably capture the bulk of our church members. And there was like 18 different data points. So I didn't print everything out because it would have been a ream of paper, but I did print out several. And what I did that because I was curious, but I want you in this interim period, through appropriate leadership and whatever it looks like, start knowing who your neighbors are. Not who you think they are and who you remember them to be, but actually looking at data. So for example, in a 10-mile radius, what do you think is the largest religious entity? It's an easy guess. Baptist. Southern Baptist in particular, Baptist. And then it moves, I think Catholic is second. I think I'm right on that. Methodist, not Presbyterian. Honestly, can't remember. Maybe Episcopal. Well, you're right. Actually, you're close. Non-denominational. That's how it was categorized. That's exactly right. I think that was actually third, non-denominational, which demographers have been tracking all along, that non-denominational, if it were a denomination, would be the largest denomination in the United States, and it's growing. Yeah. So that also tells you that people aren't looking at the brand labels anymore. But that's also a little upsetting because it's almost like an anything goes mindset. Well, this flavor looks good this month, and that flavor looks good that month. What does it even matter? And of course, I think all of us in here would say it does matter. All right. But the next profile I looked at was the ones in the last 5 years that have made the most significant change, that have grown. Baptists were not on the top 5 list. Non-denominational were. The number one was the National Baptist, which is an predominantly African-American Baptist denomination, growing. There's all kind of other data points. I thought it was interesting that 10-mile radius, The population, what do you think? Is it getting younger or getting older? Nope, older. 40 and older. Significant growth gain. Now, it's drawing some, but think about it. If you're 30 years old, can you afford to live in Roswell? Now, apparently in my neighborhood they are, because there's kids and they're paying twice as much for their home than I did for mine. But seriously, it's challenging. I'm not a demographer, so I don't know how to quite read this, but I'm just simply pointing out. And if I were a pastor, I would be kind of thinking, what does this say? Do we need to recruit younger people? Do we need to ignore younger people? Do we need to pay attention to older people? I mean, there's all kind of exciting questions, and I don't think there's a one answer, but I do think having informed information about one's backyard is pretty important. Language groups or ethnicity, that's kind of all over the map, but let's just play the guessing game. What do you think is the fastest growing in the last 5 years? Fastest growing ethnic group? What do you think? All right, I heard Hispanic, Asian. You said like Southeast Asian, yeah. Asian, right? He's exactly right, but by a long shot, actually. Now you have growth in Hispanic. You have growth. Decrease in Native American, there weren't many, but it was interesting. It was a decrease in Native American. Pacific Islanders was a decrease, I thought, and there weren't many either. There was even fewer of those. But yeah, the Asian population, which is a large category, by the way. I'm assuming that includes Southeast Asia. That includes Asia, so that's a large category. Income level is continuing to grow higher in the last 5 years. Again, that's not a big surprise. So, maybe we'll do another Wednesday night and we'll just do data diving. Get to know your neighbor, because for those of us that have always lived here, you've seen change, but you don't know how to articulate the change because you've lived here, right? That's understandable. Some of you that are newcomers are like going, yeah, I thought the narratives I was hearing at church wasn't really matching up to my own neighborhood. Right? So this is a good time for a church to start looking at who are neighbors and exercising the freedoms that we've been talking about for the last 5 weeks. All right, I'll stop there because I didn't bring my data pile with them. I gave them to Logan, but I did find it interesting. Yes, sir.
You were talking a while ago about blue laws. Blue laws are in the majority of the people in the United States are Christian. And that's how the blue laws got in. But we also in favor of freedom, and that's what got rid of a lot of them because they protected people that weren't Christian. And I think where we really made a mistake was that, like when I was in the dating age, I could take a girl to any movie. It might not be a good movie, but there wouldn't be nudity, there wouldn't be extreme violence, there would be no story, none of the guilt that's today. And the only reason that they're so successful is because we as Christians bought the tickets to them.
Yeah.
And when we hadn't supported that or supported the stuff that's on the internet, kids watch the pornography sites, number one addiction. The Christians need to stand up.
Yeah, which is a nod to the accommodation model. If you accommodate, I wish I could remember which Baptist leader said this. And I'm sort of taking what you just said and running even a whole nother direction, but I want to acknowledge, but I don't know if it's Cecil Sherman. I hate to attribute to people it may not have been, but it could have been Tony Campolo. I can't remember, but he said mixing government and religion is like mixing manure and ice cream. It doesn't hurt the manure, but it ruins the ice cream. And I actually think that's true. So again, and we can all have our different takes on that. But if we cherish our freedoms, we then have to also support the freedoms of the other. So in my neighborhood I live in a Whitehall subdivision, right off Howells Road. I have several Muslim families in the neighborhood. I've got several Jewish families in the neighborhood. One of our dear friends, we are usually in each other's home at least once a week. She's from Tel Aviv. You can only imagine how traumatic the last 4 or 5 months has been for her. We often have conversations about our faith. We're not trying to pull one up on the other. We're just trying to be human beings that love and care for each other and respect one another. She sends us Christmas cards and we send, happy Hanukkah cards. So my point being is that that's what makes this country a wonderful nation, is that we have the freedom to support this and defend it for the other. And here's the other rub, and the freedom not to believe. And I don't know if y'all have noticed or not. I don't want you to practice it, but there's been a few Sundays since not being a pastor, not many, but I've not been in church because I've been very grateful. I've had wonderful congregations to serve, and I'm glad I have purpose in this one for this season. But stay home on Sunday if you're in the neighborhood, and see who all else is staying home too. But that's their right. That's their freedom. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, this religious freedom. And I don't want to overstate it, but I don't think I can overstate it. It is a Baptist hallmark. It was something that Baptists and Quakers particularly championed because it was important. Let us practice our faith. You practice your faith. And we have the right to agree and we have the right to disagree, but we have this freedom and nobody's going to kick our door down and say you're doing different. Other comments or observations? I have a son, my oldest son is in the food industry business. And imagine not having a restaurant open on Sunday. He's got a lot of stories about church people, by the way. And he now works in a retirement community, which they're 7 days a week anyway. But yeah, I mean, we have a commerce that depends on some of that. So I'm not putting it down. Growing up on a dairy farm, cows don't take Sunday off. I can tell you that. But my dad was pretty interesting. If it could wait until Monday, it'd wait until Monday. So you milked and you did the very basics, but you didn't do the other stuff. You didn't bale hay. You didn't do things to catch up on the week ahead. You enjoyed that Sunday as best you could, even though you have work to do in church. Yes, sir.
I have another question. When I taught high school Sunday school, one of the kids used the Bible called the Message. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, the Message.
I couldn't find the contradicted the Bible in the we were studying.
Yeah, the Message. That's what I was referring to earlier that Eugene Peterson translated, the Message. So it is a translation in that what I mean by that is he did use original languages to translate, but he did it in a kind of a modern vernacular, a paraphrase type approach. So it reads differently. Here's another example that was translation from the Greek. Have y'all ever heard of the Cotton Patch Gospels? Yeah. Clarence Jordan was a New Testament Greek scholar, taught at Southern Seminary. And he said, well, you know what? I want to write a translation of the Bible. It's going to be an interpretation. But what if it was set in the Deep South? And as I remember, Atlanta was Jerusalem. Basically, he used the state of Georgia to kind of map out Jesus's journeys. Used some harsh language to refer to Samaritans. And the point was, this is what Samaritans were. The way that we might have referred in harsh ways in yesteryear. So it's not I commend it to you. I won't read it behind the pulpit, but I commend it to you if you're kind of interested in what would this look like if Jesus were to come to the Deep South in the mid-1900s. What might he say and what might he comment about and how would that look? It's a pretty striking, and I think there's a play called the Cotton Patch Gospels. I've not seen the play. He also started the Koinonia Farms down in South Georgia, which became the early model of what is now Habitat for Humanity. And so there's kind of a lineage there. Other comments?
I was busy with downtown church, but Easter Sunday, and they were showing the Bible verses that the preacher was going to preach on. So fascinated because it was not the way I usually do it. So I asked them, somebody asked me, well, and they said, well, out of Mexico. And so I tracked down that. But then when I did, after I got one, then I said, oh, this is what I need. So I got one, and the New International Version on half the page.
Okay, yeah.
And it has been fascinating to be able to look at the two.
To compare them. Yeah, very good. Sound like we need to go back and do Bible freedom all over again. That's excellent. Yes, sir.
So the Baptist deal, open to be very open, different people. What are your thoughts on Mormons and the books that are left out?
Yeah, boy, now you're getting into, yeah. Question is we know what our thoughts are. Mormons, Jehovah's Witness. You didn't say Jehovah's Witness, but I mean, that would, I didn't hear the other you.
The books left out of the.
Oh, the book. Okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Ooh, wait, yeah, that's a lot you're asking, and that's worth responding to. So let me respond in a story that's going to emphasize the importance of religious freedom. My lesson in religious freedom in the United States began when I was in grade school, and I remember it so clearly. Second grade, first grade, second grade, and third grade, now that I think about it. So do y'all remember how in school you'd stand up, you'd have to pledge to the allegiance and so forth? Yeah. And so we did that in Eatonton Grammar School. And there was a little girl named Gwen. And Gwen, every time we'd stand up, she'd walk out, not in a rude way, but she would walk out and wait till we got through the pledge, and then she'd come back in. She was a Jehovah's Witness. And so and now, I'm not getting into Jehovah's Witness particular beliefs, but I do want to say what's interesting is one of the reasons they don't take oaths is because Jesus said, don't take oaths. Let your yes be yes. So it actually becomes a very literal line to that. Now, that said, she had now some would argue, did she have the freedom when you had to make her leave versus, everyone else saying, I'm not going to go there yet. But that's an example of, in our country, at least trying to understand, Gwen had the right to practice a religious belief. And let me just, on the record, say, I have a lot of problems with the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses. I have a lot of problems with the beliefs of Mormonism. And those are also two very different belief systems as well. I'm not necessarily answering, but I am kind of making a comment about religious groups that have some form of a Christian ethos, but don't seem to be part of mainstream Christianity. That might be worth a whole different conversation to look at different specific branches of Christianity, however that's defined. Now, your other comment, which is, I think, different, the books of the Bible. And so we tend to think of the only books in the Bible are the Old Testament and the New Testament. But if you're who grew up Catholic here? I thought we had a couple of former Catholics. Anyway, the Apocrypha is a collection of intertestament books that did not make it into the canon. That came from the Council of Nicaea, which was 4th century AD or CE. And so during this meeting, the canon was shortened, and then the Protestant Reformation solidified what we call now the Protestant Bible, which is Old Testament and New Testament.